The museum loomed in the moonlight, its towering marble columns casting shadows that stretched across the empty street. It was close to midnight, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the occasional gust of wind. 4 figures huddled behind a parked van, their faces masked, their gear dark and tactical. Victor, the leader, checked his watch. "We move now," he whispered, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. His grizzled face was barely visible beneath his hood, but the cold determination in his eyes spoke volumes. He turned to the 3 men beside him. Experienced, hardened thieves, each with their own role to play. "Stick to the plan. No improvising. We're in and out in 10 minutes. The youngest of the group, Milo, swallowed nervously. This was his first big job, and the weight of it pressed down on him. He nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his backpack. His wide eyes darted from side to side, as if the shadows themselves were watching. Next to him, Lucas, the tech guy, tapped away on a tablet. His fingers flew across the screen as he hacked into the museum's security system. The faint green glow from his screen lit up his smug grin. "Cameras are down. I've cut the alarm, too. Doors are unlocked. We've got 10 minutes until the backup kicks in." Victor gave a sharp nod. "Good. Let's move." The 4th man, Gregor, stood silently, his massive frame casting an imposing shadow even in the darkness. He was the muscle, quiet, strong, and quick to action. He cracked his knuckles, eager for the job to be done. The team crossed the street and slipped into the museum's side entrance. The hallway was dimly lit, and the scent of age and history filled the air. They moved with purpose, their footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. Paintings of ancient battles lined the walls, relics from civilizations long gone gleaming under the faint emergency lights. Their target was deeper inside, the exhibit housing the statue of Athena, along with a priceless golden amulet said to have belonged to the goddess herself. Victor had planned this heist for months, drawn to the legend of the amulet. He didn't believe in curses or divine power, just money and what it could buy. As they neared the central exhibit room, Milo couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the museum itself was holding its breath. He glanced at the others, but no one seemed to notice. Victor led them onward, unbothered. They arrived at the grand exhibit hall. The room was enormous, its high ceilings lost in shadow. Marble statues of Greek gods and goddesses lined the perimeter, each one towering and majestic. At the center stood the statue of Athena, larger than life, her stone eyes gazing out over the room with an air of timeless authority. She wore a helmet, a shield rested at her side, and her spear pointed toward the sky. Victor's gaze locked on the golden amulet draped around Athena's neck. It gleamed even in the low light, calling to him. Lucas moved forward, setting up his equipment to disable the glass case that protected it. As Lucas worked, Milo found himself staring at the statue. Something about it made his skin crawl. Athena's eyes seemed to follow him, her expression far too lifelike for a mere sculpture. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling a strange chill run down his spine. "You all right, kid?" Victor asked, noticing Milo's discomfort. Yeah, I'm fine," Milo muttered, though he couldn't shake the feeling that those stone eyes were watching him. "Focus, we're almost done," Victor said. Lucas gave a low whistle as the final click sounded. "Got it. Case is open." He stepped back, proud of his work. Victor moved in, his gloved hand reaching for the amulet. He lifted it carefully from the statue's neck, the gold heavy and cool in his palm. He slipped it into his bag, his heart racing with the thrill of the steel. For a moment, all was silent. Then the lights flickered. Milo froze, his breath catching in his throat. The faint buzzing of electricity filled the room, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. A low, almost imperceptible creaking sound echoed through the hall, like the groan of old wood or the shifting of ancient stone. "Did you hear that?" Milo whispered, looking around nervously. "Relax," Victor snapped. "It's an old building. It settles." But even Victor's eyes darted toward the statue of Athena. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching longer. The faint creak came again, this time louder. Milo's gaze shot to the statue, and his heart skipped a beat. Was it just his imagination, or had the shield on Athena's arm shifted slightly? "Something's not right," Milo stammered, stepping back. "Keep it together," Lucas muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. He glanced at the security feed on his tablet, but everything appeared normal. "Let's get out of here," Gregor grunted, his deep voice cutting through the growing tension. "Now." Victor nodded, but as they turned to leave, there was a sharp, deafening crack. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot, and all four men froze. Milo's eyes darted to the statue of Athena, and his blood ran cold. A thin crack had appeared on the marble shield, spiderwebbing across its surface. Did that just happen?" Lucas whispered, his face pale. Victor narrowed his eyes, his jaw clenched. "Move, now." They rushed toward the exit, their footsteps pounding against the cold marble floor. But the creaking sound followed them, louder now, more insistent. Milo glanced back over his shoulder, just in time to see Athena's stone hand twitch, the crack on the shield widening. His breath caught in his throat as the statue's stone eyes seemed to shift, focusing on them as if aware of their presence. Panic surged through him. "Run!" Milo shouted, and this time no one argued. They bolted down the hall, the sound of cracking stone and groaning marble chasing them through the darkened museum. Milo's heart raced, his mind spinning in disbelief. Whatever had just happened, whatever they had awoken, wasn't going to let them leave easily. And deep in the exhibit hall, the statue of Athena began to move. The museum's dark hallways blurred past as the thieves sprinted for the exit, their breaths ragged and panicked. The weight of the golden amulet in Victor's bag felt heavier with every step, but he refused to let go. They weren't losing their payday over some old building's creaks. Behind them, the sound of cracking stone echoed louder, like bones breaking in a hollow chamber. Milo, lagging behind the group, couldn't resist glancing back. His heart dropped into his stomach. The statue of Athena wasn't just cracking. It was moving. He saw it clear as day. The stone fingers around the shield shifted slightly, gripping the edge tighter. He blinked, convinced his mind was playing tricks on him, but no. Athena's cold marble eyes seemed to follow their retreat, her entire posture subtly altering. "Guy, she's—" Milo's voice cracked, his panic rising, but Victor cut him off. "Shut it. We're almost out," Victor snapped, though his voice carried a sharp edge of fear now too. He had seen it. They all had. But admitting it made it real, and Victor wasn't about to lose control. Lucas skidded to a stop near the stairwell. "What the hell is happening, man?" His usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by wide-eyed fear. "That statue. It's not supposed to do that." Gregor, the silent muscle, stood just behind Victor, eyes flicking between the exit and the direction they'd come from. "We need to leave. Now." "I'm not losing this score," Victor growled, his hands gripping the straps of his bag like a lifeline. "Whatever's going on, we're out in 5 minutes, tops." Everyone keeps their heads on straight. But just as Victor finished, another loud crack boomed from the exhibit hall. This time, the sound was followed by the unmistakable clank of something heavy hitting the floor. The group turned in unison, their breath held, dread building in their chests. Athena's statue had stepped off its pedestal. The once immobile figure was now standing in the middle of the room, fully upright. The spear in her hand gleamed under the faint emergency lights, and her shield, cracked but still formidable, was held at her side. Her marble face, previously cold and lifeless, now seemed animated. her eyes glowing faintly, flickering like embers catching fire. What the hell is that? Milo whispered, backing up until he hit the wall behind him. Athena's head turned ever so slightly, her gaze locking onto them. The room's air thickened, oppressive and suffocating. The hairs on the back of Victor's neck stood on end as he felt something ancient, something divine stirring in the air around them. This wasn't just a statue coming to life. This was a goddess awakening. "Victor, we need to go," Lucas shouted, already halfway up the stairs. "Now." But before they could take another step, Athena moved. Her spear scraped the floor as she adjusted her stance, each movement precise and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. She wasn't in any rush. She didn't need to be. Gregor, ever the brute, pulled out his knife, holding it with a steady grip despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm not running from some rock," he growled. "Gregor, don't," Victor shouted, but it was too late. Gregor charged, knife in hand, aiming for the marble joints in Athena's armor. His blade made contact with her stone leg, but the impact did nothing more than scrape the surface. Athena's eyes flared with a sudden intensity. In a flash, her spear shot forward with deadly precision. Gregor had no time to react. The spear pierced through his chest, the sound of cracking bone and ripping flesh filling the hall. Gregor's body slumped to the floor, lifeless. The others stared in horror, frozen in place. The sheer power of Athena's strike was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. This was no longer about money. This was about survival. "Go! Run!" Victor barked, his voice breaking through the fog of terror that held them still. Lucas bolted up the stairs, Milo close on his heels. Victor followed, the weight of the amulet now feeling like a curse rather than a prize. They didn't look back as they raced through the winding halls of the museum, but they could hear it. The steady, deliberate footsteps of Athena echoing behind them. The sound of stone on stone, slow and unyielding, as if she knew they had nowhere to go. Milo's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind raced. How could a statue come to life? How could they fight something that wasn't even human? He had heard stories of cursed relics and haunted objects, but this was something far worse. They reached the museum's main corridor, the large glass doors to the outside world just ahead. Lucas slammed into the door, frantically trying to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked. It's—" A sharp clang echoed through the hall as Athena's spear struck the ground just behind them. Lucas turned, his face pale. "We're trapped." Victor's eyes darted around, looking for another exit, but his mind was racing too fast to think straight. The walls seemed to close in around them, the sound of Athena's footsteps growing louder, closer, back. "We need to find another way out," Victor shouted, grabbing Milo by the arm and pulling him away from the door. But Milo stopped, his eyes wide with realization. "She's not going to let us leave, is she?" Victor's grip tightened. "We're getting out of here. I don't care what that thing is. We'll find a way." Milo's eyes locked on the glowing amulet still slung over Victor's shoulder. "It's the amulet. We never should have taken it." Victor glared at him. "Shut up. We'll figure it out later." But deep down, Milo knew. They had stolen something far more than gold. They had stolen from a goddess. And she wasn't done with them yet. The museum's grand corridor stretched out before them like an endless tunnel of darkness and dread. The sound of Athena's slow, deliberate footsteps echoed in the vast space, each step a reminder that the goddess was closing in. Victor, Lucas, and Milo sprinted down the hall, their minds racing for a plan. Any plan that could save them. Victor's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced over his shoulder. Athena wasn't running. She didn't need to. She moved with the slow confidence of something that knew its prey was trapped. "We need to get out of here," Lucas gasped, his voice cracking under the strain of panic. She's gonna kill us, man. No one's dying tonight, Victor growled, though even he could hear the fear creeping into his voice. We're not going down without a fight. You saw what she did to Gregor, Milo said, his voice barely above a whisper. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. We can't fight that. We can't fight her. Victor's jaw clenched as he forced his mind to think. He wasn't used to being cornered. He always had control. But Athena, she was a force beyond anything he had ever faced. This wasn't just some security guard or alarm system. This was a living, breathing goddess of war. Ahead of them, the corridor branched off into several smaller hallways. Victor made a split-second decision. This way, he shouted, turning sharply down one of the side corridors. Lucas and Milo followed, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space. They emerged into another exhibit room, this one lined with ancient weapons and armor from various civilizations. Swords, shields, and spears were displayed behind glass cases, gleaming in the dim emergency lights. Victor's eyes locked onto the weapons. We'll arm ourselves. If we're going down fighting. Are you insane? Lucas spat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. That thing's not human. We can't stab our way out of this. Do you have a better idea? Victor snapped, grabbing a steel rod from his bag and smashing the glass case in front of him. The sound shattered the eerie silence of the room, and Victor reached in, pulling out a gladius, a short, ancient sword. He tested its weight, the cold steel heavy in his hand. Lucas hesitated but followed suit, breaking into another case and grabbing a spear. His hand shook as he held it, the reality of their situation sinking in. Milo stood frozen, staring at the weapons but unable to bring himself to take one. What are you waiting for? Victor barked. Arm yourself. Milo shook his head, his breath shallow. It won't matter. She'll kill us just like Gregor. Not if we take her out first, Victor said, his voice hard. She bleeds. She dies. She's just another target. But even as he said it, Victor knew it wasn't that simple. Athena wasn't like anything they'd ever dealt with before. She wasn't just a statue that had come to life. She was something older, something far more dangerous. The sound of Athena's footsteps grew louder. She was close. Victor's grip tightened on the sword, his knuckles white. We'll split up, he said, his mind racing for a strategy. We spread out, make her chase one of us. The others flank her. Are you serious? Lucas asked, his voice cracking. You think we can outsmart a goddess? We don't have a choice, Victor shot back. If we stick together, we're dead. Milo finally took a step forward, his hand shaking as he reached for a sword in the shattered case. He didn't believe they could win. He didn't believe anything would save them at this point. But the weight of the blade in his hand gave him a small sense of control. Victor motioned for them to move. Go, now. Lucas bolted to the left, disappearing into the shadows of the next corridor. Milo hesitated for a moment, but the fear of being left behind drove him to follow Victor down a different hallway. The plan was reckless, suicidal, even. But it was all they had. Victor and Milo ran, their footsteps echoing through the narrow hall. Every sound seemed amplified. Their breathing, the creak of the floor beneath them, and always the steady, relentless footsteps of Athena behind them. They rounded a corner, and Victor skidded to a stop in front of a large double door that led to another exhibit. He pushed the doors open and motioned for Milo to follow. The room beyond was massive, filled with ancient relics and statues. Tall windows lined the walls, moonlight streaming through and casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Victor's eyes scanned the room, searching for a vantage point. He could hear Lucas somewhere in the distance, his footsteps faint. They were running out of time. Hide, Victor hissed, shoving Milo toward a stack of crates in the corner of the room. Wait for her to come in, then we hit her from both sides. Milo nodded, his face pale and sweaty. He crouched behind the crates, clutching the sword in trembling hands. Victor took his position behind a marble pillar, his heart pounding in his chest. Silence fell over the room. The air was thick with tension, every creak of the building setting their nerves on edge. Victor's grip on the gladius tightened as he waited, his mind racing through the plan. Then she appeared. Athena stepped into the room, her massive form casting a long shadow over the floor. Her spear dragged behind her, scraping the marble with a bone-chilling sound. Her glowing eyes scanned the room, methodical and patient. She was a hunter, and they were her prey. Victor held his breath, his muscles coiled like a spring. He waited for her to step further into the room, waited for the right moment to strike. But Athena wasn't in any rush. She moved slowly, her gaze piercing through the darkness as if she could see through the walls and shadows. And then, without warning, she turned her head directly toward Milo's hiding spot. Milo froze, his breath catching in his throat. The goddess's eyes locked onto him, and in that instant, he knew there was no escape. "Milo, run!" Victor shouted, charging from his hiding place. But it was too late. Athena's spear shot forward with terrifying speed, piercing through the crates as if they were made of paper. Milo let out a strangled gasp as the spear drove through his chest, pinning him to the ground. Blood pooled beneath him, his wide eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Victor stumbled to a stop, his heart plummeting. Milo's body hung lifeless from Athena's spear, the cold finality of death settling over the room. Athena pulled the spear free with a swift, effortless motion, the sound of ripping flesh filling the room. Her eyes flickered toward Victor, and for the first time in his life, Victor felt truly powerless. He had made a fatal mistake. This wasn't just a heist. This was a curse. Victor's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at Milo's lifeless body, impaled by Athena's spear. The young thief's blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the cold marble floor like a dark omen. Victor's heart raced, but his mind screamed at him to move. Survival instincts taking over. Without a second thought, Victor turned and ran. His boots echoed through the towering corridors of the museum, and every step felt like it was being hunted by the weight of a god's vengeance. He had no plan, just a primal need to escape. But deep down, he knew Athena wasn't going to let them leave. Not alive. Somewhere in the maze of halls, Lucas was out there, possibly still alive. But Victor knew that calling out for him would only bring Athena closer. He had to think, had to stay calm. Athena wasn't human. She was ancient, intelligent, and methodical. She was playing with them, and no matter how fast he ran, she was in control. Victor reached a side corridor and ducked inside, pressing his back against the cool stone wall. He forced himself to take slow, quiet breaths, trying to muffle the panic in his chest. His fingers tightened around the gladius in his hand, but it felt useless, like a child's toy against the overwhelming power they faced. The museum was dead silent now, except for the occasional distant clang of Athena's spear dragging across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the halls like the toll of a death knell. He listened, heart pounding, for any sign of Lucas, a shuffle, a breath, anything. But all he heard was the slow, deliberate footsteps of the goddess stalking them. Victor pressed his eyes shut, cursing himself for bringing them here. The greed that had driven him to this place now felt like chains around his neck, pulling him into the abyss. Suddenly, a faint noise broke the silence. Footsteps, lighter, quicker, and uneven. It wasn't Athena. It was Lucas. Victor moved quietly, slipping from his hiding spot and following the sound. He caught sight of Lucas ahead, clutching his spear, eyes wild with fear as he stumbled through the dim corridor. He looked like a man being chased by death itself. "Lucas!" Victor hissed, keeping his voice low. Lucas spun around, his eyes locking onto Victor with a mixture of relief and terror. "She's close, man. We're dead." We're dead. Victor grabbed Lucas by the arm, shaking him hard. Get a grip. We're not dead yet. We just need a plan. Plan? What plan? Lucas's voice was a frantic whisper, his face slick with sweat. She's a damn goddess. She just killed Milo like it was nothing. We need to get out of here. Victor tightened his grip on Lucas. Listen to me. If we keep running like this, she'll pick us off one by one. We need to outsmart her. Lucas's breath was ragged, his mind racing in 1,000 directions. But Victor's words cut through the haze of fear. How? Lucas managed to ask, his voice cracking. How do we beat something like her? Victor's mind raced. Athena's a warrior. She fights with strategy, not just brute force. We need to find a way to turn this place against her. Use the museum itself. Its layout, the exhibits, whatever we can find. Lucas shook his head, doubt clouding his features. You think we can outsmart a goddess? We have to try, Victor said, his voice firm. We don't have a choice. The faint clang of Athena's spear scraping against the floor echoed through the halls once more, closer this time. Lucas flinched, his grip tightening around his spear. Okay, Lucas whispered. What do we do? Victor scanned the corridor, his mind working through every possibility. The museum was vast, filled with relics, statues, and weapons from every corner of history. Maybe there was something they could use, something ancient and powerful that could turn the tide in their favor. Follow me, Victor said, his voice low but steady. We're heading for the ancient weapons exhibit. Lucas followed, his steps shaky but determined. They moved quickly but quietly, their eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. The museum felt like a labyrinth, every turn leading them deeper into the unknown. As they entered the ancient weapons exhibit, the room felt different, heavier. The air was thick with history, with the weight of centuries-old battles fought and won. Swords, shields, and spears lined the walls, some rusted with age, others still gleaming under the faint emergency lights. The faint metallic scent of old steel filled the air. Victor immediately went for a large shield hanging on the wall. It was battered and worn, but it looked sturdy. He strapped it to his arm, his mind racing. We set a trap, Victor muttered. Draw her in here. These old weapons, they've seen battle. Maybe they'll give us a chance. Lucas picked up another spear, his hands shaking as he clutched it. What if they don't? Victor's jaw tightened. Then, we make sure we go down fighting. The sound of footsteps, Athena's heavy, deliberate steps, echoed through the corridor again. They were getting closer. Victor turned to Lucas, his voice barely above a whisper. You hide behind those columns. When she comes in, I'll get her attention. You hit her from the side. Lucas nodded, his face pale but determined. He crouched behind the nearest column, his spear ready. Victor moved to the center of the room, his heart racing but his mind focused. This was it. Either they made a stand here, or they died like the others. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the vast hall like the toll of a funeral bell. Then she appeared. Athena stepped into the exhibit, her glowing eyes scanning the room. Her spear gleamed in the faint light, the sound of it dragging across the marble sending chills down Victor's spine. She moved slowly, methodically, as if savoring the moment. Victor raised his sword and shield, his muscles coiled and ready. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Come and get me. Athena's gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, she charged. Her speed was incredible, far faster than anything Victor had expected. He barely had time to raise his shield before her spear slammed into it with the force of a battering ram, sending him stumbling backward. The impact rattled his bones, but he held his ground. Lucas! Victor shouted, but no answer came. Athena moved with terrifying precision, her spear slashing through the air as she pressed the attack. Victor parried desperately, using the shield to deflect her blows, but each strike chipped away at his defenses. "Lucas!" Victor yelled again, panic creeping into his voice, but Lucas never appeared. Victor's heart sank as he realized the truth. Lucas had fled. He had abandoned him, leaving Victor alone to face the wrath of the goddess. Athena's spear struck again, this time breaking through Victor's defenses and knocking him to the ground. He rolled to the side, barely avoiding a fatal blow, but the gladius slipped from his grasp, skidding across the floor. Victor scrambled to his feet, blood pounding in his ears. Athena loomed over him, her glowing eyes cold and merciless. "Please," Victor gasped, backing away. "Please." But there was no mercy in the eyes of the goddess. With a swift, final motion, Athena's spear drove forward. Victor's world exploded in pain as the spear pierced his chest, driving him back against the wall. His breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurring. As the darkness closed in, Victor's last thought was of the amulet. The cursed amulet that had led them here, to their doom. The museum was silent once more, except for the sound of Athena's footsteps as she walked away, her spear dripping with blood. The museum was eerily silent once again, save for the soft echo of Athena's footsteps receding into the darkness. Lucas, crouched behind an ancient marble column in the next hall, was paralyzed with fear. His hands trembled as he clutched the spear, his body frozen by the weight of his own cowardice. He had heard everything. The sound of Victor's final gasps, the sickening crunch of the spear driving into his chest, the slow, deliberate pace of Athena as she walked away from her fallen prey. And Lucas had done nothing. His heart raced as the reality of his betrayal hit him. Victor was dead. Milo was dead. Gregor was dead. And it was only a matter of time before the goddess came for him. "I can't stay here," Lucas whispered to himself, shaking uncontrollably. "I have to get out. I have to." But how? Athena wasn't some common enemy. She was something else. Something beyond him. His spear felt like a useless twig in his hand, and his entire body screamed for him to run. But where would he go? The exits were locked, and Athena had every advantage. He was trapped, just like the others. His mind raced, desperate for a way out. He couldn't fight her. That much was clear. She was too strong, too fast. And yet, the thought of facing her wrath, of dying like the others, terrified him more than anything. He had to think, had to outsmart her somehow. Suddenly, his eyes landed on the amulet hanging from his neck. Victor had passed it to him during their escape. Thrust it into his hands without thinking, perhaps assuming it was safer in someone else's possession. Lucas stared at the golden relic, the intricately carved symbols reflecting the dim light of the room. The amulet. It had to be connected to Athena's awakening. The moment they had taken it, everything had gone wrong. But maybe, just maybe, it was the key to stopping her. Lucas's breath came in shallow gasps as a desperate idea began to form in his mind. Athena wasn't attacking mindlessly. She was driven by purpose. She wanted the amulet back. If he could give it to her, maybe she would stop. Maybe she would let him live. "I have to try," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I have to." Slowly, carefully, Lucas rose from his hiding spot. His legs were shaky, but the determination to survive forced him to move. He adjusted the amulet around his neck, the cool weight of it pressing against his chest. There was no time for second-guessing. Lucas moved through the shadows, keeping his footsteps light, his heart pounding in his ears. He made his way back toward the exhibit hall where Athena had killed Victor, knowing she was still nearby. The faint sound of her spear dragging across the floor sent chills down his spine, but he pressed forward. Finally, he saw her. Athena stood near the center of the exhibit, her back turned to him. Her posture was regal, unwavering. The spear rested by her side, her shield slightly raised as if she were waiting, always prepared for battle. The sight of her made Lucas's breath hitch, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was his only chance. "Hey!" Lucas called out, his voice cracking but loud enough to echo through the hall. Athena's head turned slowly, her glowing eyes locking onto him with the same cold, unfeeling gaze she had given to Victor and the others. Lucas's throat tightened, but he held up the amulet, letting it catch the light. "You want this, don't you?" he said, his voice shaking but firm. "That's what you've been after this whole time. I'll give it back. Just let me go." Athena stared at him for a long, agonizing moment, her expression unreadable. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for any sign of response. Sweat dripped down his face as the tension built, and for a brief, hopeful second, he thought he saw something change in her eyes. Maybe she would take the amulet and let him live. Maybe. Without warning, Athena moved. Her spear shot forward with blinding speed, and Lucas barely had time to react. He stumbled backward, the spear missing him by inches as it drove into the wall behind him. His heart slammed against his ribs as he scrambled to his feet, panic flooding his veins. "Wait, I'm giving it back," he screamed, fumbling with the amulet as he tried to pull it off. But Athena didn't stop. She advanced, her movements swift and relentless, the glow in her eyes intensifying as she closed the distance between them. Lucas's hands shook uncontrollably as he yanked the amulet free from his neck, holding it out in front of him like a shield. "Here, take it. Just take it." But the goddess didn't slow. Her spear slashed through the air again, and Lucas ducked, the blade narrowly missing him. He fell to the ground, the amulet slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. Athena paused, her gaze shifting to the fallen relic for a brief moment. Lucas's breath came in shallow gasps as he realized his mistake. It wasn't about the amulet. Athena had awakened for a purpose greater than just retrieving an old relic. She wasn't here to reclaim what had been stolen. She was here to deliver judgment. Her role as the goddess of war and wisdom was clear now. The thieves had desecrated her temple, her resting place, and the price for such hubris was their lives. Lucas crawled backward, his back hitting the cold marble wall. There was nowhere left to run. Athena stood over him now, her spear raised high, her glowing eyes fixed on him with an ancient, terrifying resolve. "Please," Lucas whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to." But his words fell on deaf ears. Athena's expression never changed. With one swift motion, the spear plunged down. The world exploded in pain, and Lucas's vision blurred. He gasped, his body trembling as the darkness closed in around him. His last fleeting thought was of the amulet lying forgotten on the floor, its power meaningless in the face of the goddess's wrath. Athena stood over him, her spear dripping with blood, her task almost complete. The silence of the museum was suffocating. The cold, dead air weighed heavily, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded within its walls only moments earlier. The bodies of the fallen thieves lay scattered throughout the grand halls, lifeless and forgotten, just as Athena had intended. The glow in Athena's eyes dimmed slightly as she gazed down at Lucas's corpse. His final desperate plea still echoed faintly in the air, but there had been no room for mercy. There never had been. A judgment had been passed, and the punishment carried out. For a moment, the goddess stood still, the spear at her side dripping with the blood of the man who had dared to defile her sanctum. The golden amulet, the very object they had sought, lay discarded on the cold marble floor, meaningless now in the grander scheme of things. But Athena wasn't finished. Her eyes, still glowing faintly, swept across the room as if sensing something more, something beyond the immediate surroundings of the museum. This was no longer about a simple break-in or even the violation of her statue. There was a deeper ancient duty that needed to be fulfilled. It was as if awakening had reminded Athena of the world she once ruled, a world where gods and mortals existed side by side, and divine justice was swift and final. Athena turned, her footsteps echoing once again in the quiet halls. The museum, with its relics and artifacts, was but a shell of history, a place where the past had been reduced to mere displays and stories. But the goddess had no interest in the past. Her eyes were now fixed on something beyond these walls. The modern world, so different from the one she had left behind, awaited her judgment. As she made her way through the museum, the soft glow of moonlight streaming through the high windows illuminated her path. Her spear scraped gently against the floor, a haunting reminder of her purpose. The cold stone of the museum had been her prison for far too long, and now that she was free, there was no going back. Athena stepped over Victor's body as she crossed the central hall. His glazed eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, his expression forever frozen in disbelief. The gladius he had used in his futile attempt to fight her was still clutched in his hand, a useless symbol of his resistance. There had been a time when mortals understood the power of the gods, when they revered and feared the divine forces that shaped their world. Athena had seen entire civilizations rise and fall, watched as wars were fought in her name. But this new world, this modern age, had forgotten the gods, forgotten her. She passed through the final corridor, the large glass doors of the museum's main entrance looming ahead. The faint glow of streetlights filtered through, illuminating the grand pillars that framed the entrance. Beyond those doors was the city, alive with people, technology, and progress. A world that had no room for gods or the ancient forces that had once ruled it. Athena stopped in front of the doors, her hand hovering over the glass. The cold surface reflected her image, the flawless marble of her form betraying none of the destruction she had wrought. Her eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, she seemed to consider the world that lay just beyond the glass. An unfamiliar world, yet one that would soon feel her presence. With a slight push, the doors creaked open. The cool night air rushed into the museum, carrying with it the sounds of the city, distant car horns, the hum of engines, the faint murmur of life moving on, oblivious to the divine being that now stood at the threshold. Athena stepped outside. The world beyond the museum was vast, sprawling in every direction, illuminated by artificial lights and towering structures of glass and steel. Cars moved along the streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, unaware of the ancient force that had just awoken among them. Athena's gaze swept across the cityscape, her eyes taking in the towering buildings, the endless streets, and the people below. So much had changed, yet the essence of humanity remained the same. Mortals still lived their lives with reckless abandon, unaware of the greater forces that shaped their destinies. And now, Athena was free to remind them. The soft click of her spear tapping against the pavement was barely audible above the noise of the city, but it didn't matter. Her presence was all that was needed. She walked down the empty sidewalk, her movements slow and deliberate. She had no need for haste. The world was vast, and she had time. Time to see what humanity had become, to decide if they were still worthy of her protection or her wrath. As she disappeared into the night, her form fading into the shadows of the towering city, one thing was certain: Athena had returned, and the world would never be the same.